Thank you for tuning in to Change and Thrive. I'm your host, Dr. Wendy Heckelman, founder and CEO of WLH Consulting and Learning Solutions. Be sure to subscribe. That way, you'll never miss an episode. Last week, in honor of Women's History Month, we started a Women's Spotlight series for those women who have changed and thrived. And I am honored to have Laurie Cooke, who is the CEO and president of the Healthcare Businesswomen's Association, on today's podcast. Welcome, Laurie.
Thank you so much, Wendy. I'm so pleased to be here.
I am so happy that you are here with us today. We know, Laurie, last year one was for the record books. We know that agility and empathetic leadership rose to the top of really critical capabilities that leaders needed as they navigated the impact of the pandemic to their employees, to their teams, both personally and professionally. And we also know now that we've lost 4 million women from the workforce, which is really staggering, as the pandemic really disproportionately brought specific challenges to women that I know you're well aware of. So I'd like to kick off today's podcast with a very simple first question, which is probably not a simple answer. What were some of the challenges you faced personally and professionally as a woman in leadership last year?
So I think all leaders did have challenges, and I put my major challenge down to us not having a precedence for this. Typically, when you face a challenge, you look back to when this happened before, this is what I did. And that just wasn't the situation. So where I found that situation to go, it made me have to rely on my own leadership, gut instincts, as well as an ability to really listen, right? Listen to what was going on, listen to what was being said, and try and project where this was going. So, right, they always tell you in sports, you're looking at where you're going to and not, as you're firing the gun or whatever it is in your sport. And so I relied very heavily on my training as a pharmacist. When I was trained, you do need to go back to a place of calm, a place of good judgment. I'm being very aware of the moment you're in. And that mindfulness was very helpful to me because it was commented on by many folks how calm I was when all of the world was falling around, around us, that I was calm. And I do think that's one of the major traits of a leader, is to keep your head while those around you are losing theirs, because people turn to you as a leader. And if you are all over the place, that doesn't give them confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. You're really talking about you came with your leadership presence was a calm and supportive style. And I want to reflect on the fact that there really wasn't, to your point, there wasn't history on how to handle this, because this is the first time we've had a pandemic in over 100 years. So and the world has changed so much. So as a leader of a global women's organization, your members and your chapters were drastically impacted. And I'm curious, were there specific challenges in leading that type of global organization as the pandemic really was spreading? Or were there learnings that were taken from one place to another that could have been applied?
So I think that's a great point about the learnings to be applied. So one is you've got to have great communication. You have to reach to people and let them know we're here, we're stable. What are you hearing? That central core nerve center. And by listening to what was going on, we were able to come back with, here's how you can make the decision. So we didn't take the decisions in-house and say, this is what we must do. We took it in-house to come out with a framework so that folks who perhaps were in a country, and let's just hold up Jacinia in New Zealand as an amazing leader, And so what might have been going on in that part of the world may be different than what's going on in New York City, where they were really being hit. So we gave them the framework to make decisions. And isn't that what leadership about? It is about making timely, thought through decisions based on data. So that's what we were trying to do. And I think that is what helped us to, and I'll use that overused word, pivot. We truly were able to say, what do our members need? And let's make sure we're giving them that.
Yeah, I mean, as a member of HBA and a leadership role in the Southeast chapter, programming went to virtual, where you could have a community of support. I mean, last week, Kelly Rodriguez was talking about reaching out to friends and to family and to colleagues to provide that support. And you're talking about calm leadership, good, timely decision-making, but support, right? For the people that you employ and for the membership, which was really critical. When you think about last year, where did you pivot or where did you adapt? Because I think everybody was an agility Gumby girl or boy, in a lot of ways. But where were your major pivots from your perspective?
I do think that when you are running an association, you have to stay true to what your purpose is. So our purpose was to make sure we were keeping our eye on gender parity and equity. So we were looking for where were potential places where women may start to backslide. And at the top of this call, you brought that up. We were actually losing women from the workforce. And so we had to focus on that. And I think that gave our companies comfort that we were listening and we were giving guidance. We were on the watch out for that. But the other piece that we had to look for is the consistency an association brings to its membership. So when you think about, you move from perhaps company to company, what stays common is the association you belong to. So we needed to be there for the member and to not all of a sudden completely reinvent ourselves. We already had enough change in the system. So it's about what is it that really for your association, and in our case, we are collaborators, connectors, that feeling of radical hospitality. So we had to make sure we had the lines open for people to connect, talk about things, process things. And then in the murder of George Floyd, that became even more relevant. People just needed to connect and talk about it, process it, and then turn to the, and now what do I do?
I would say that, that was a very triggering event. I think it brought forth truly, the disparities that, HBA has been working towards for so long, from women and people of color, to really bring to the forefront that, there is gender inequality. There is racial inequity in organizations that you see, and how people advance through their career or what opportunities they get. So I think that is a key learning for sure in terms of what needed to pivot. But as we think about 2021, there's a bright light. There's 3 vaccines that are on the market. They're really good treatments. We know a lot more about this disease and how to treat it better. And given that Healthcare Businesswomen's Association is at the corner, right, at the crux of everything that has happened, last year, I laugh with a lot of my clients and I say, pharma used to always be the big enemy, but now they're part of the solution. And in a very collaborative sense that we've probably never seen, where companies were sharing research and everything else. That was terrific. That HBA looks to connect people to be able to share and learn from one another. What would you say are really the key lessons learned from last year that you think are going to be critical as we apply into 2021 and beyond?
I think the first I'd say is dig your well before you're thirsty. I think that was one of the things we did really well, and this can apply to absolutely everything you're doing. So it is planning ahead and preparing for it so that when something happens, you're ready to take action. I think we learned that very, very well, and many associations didn't make it. Many companies didn't make it. That's one. The second I would say is tomorrow is promised to no one. I think a lot of people spent a year reflecting on what was important to them. And as women, we are pulled in a lot of different directions. And quite often we feel we're trying to do everything for everyone. And you can have everything, just not at the same time. So you do need to be more reflective and mindful about, this is what's important right now in my life. This is what's important perhaps the next day, et cetera. So you can feel better about what you're doing. And don't forget yourself on that list of priorities. The other thing I thought was really interesting is the equalization that being on Zoom and everyone has the same size Zoom box, whether you're the entry-level person or the executive. And that is going to be very interesting how that plays out, because it brought us a bit more equal and more aware of what was going on in each other's lives. And perhaps the last piece is when we do start going back into the office, and some folks are doing that right now, we're starting to see more men go into the office and more women continuing to work remotely. And that power dynamic is going to have an impact. So please be thinking, if you are the one choosing to stay remote, and that makes total sense for many of us, that you are going to perhaps have to adjust how you are keeping relationships with your mentor and your sponsors, so people don't forget about you when those relationships that are happening over the water cooler in person continue to go on.
Wow, those are 4 great learnings. And I love the build the well before you need the water. And I agree with you that I think that there's been a lot of women that voluntarily left their jobs, not their jobs lost, because of the prioritization, or that they really couldn't at the time manage homeschooling children and working remotely and everything that came together. So I think that it's a struggle for everyone, but I think for women in particular. But I love your last point. And I want to ask you to just expand on it in a minute in terms of, as people are re-entering work, and we know that pharma is going to fundamentally change in a lot of ways. We're going to see contractions, we're going to see hybrid models, we're going to see a lot of different elements play out over the coming months and through this year. Talk a little bit about this connectivity to make sure that you continue to be mentored and sponsored. And maybe it's helpful to differentiate between mentorship and sponsorship for a minute for the audience.
All right, let's unpack that. Mentorship, it typically happens when you have someone, they can be younger or more mature than you, that knows something that you don't know. So you have a mentor that helps you with a particular thing, whether it is, I need to better understand the pharmaceutical industry and how drug development works because I'm new to that industry. Whereas sponsorship tends to be a couple of levels higher than you, where someone recognizes that you are, let's say you're a go-getter, you're a problem solver, you're a negotiator, whatever your special sauce is, your superpower, and they recognize that because you've worked a relationship with them where you've been able to show them what it is you can do, so that when they are in a room and an opportunity comes up where they're looking for that go-getter, this person says, I know, Wendy can do this, and they put your name forward. So much of that is about putting your reputation on the line because you put that person's name for that role. So when you are thinking about you're working remotely and your colleagues are in the office with the sponsor that you want to sponsor you, you're going to have to adjust how you stay in front of that sponsor. So that's the piece that, again, we don't know how to do this, but I want to make sure people are aware of it so they can look out for those opportunities and not get caught later and go, I wished I'd known I needed to make a different effort.
No, I think that's a great point, because sponsorship is really advocation. And we know that women are often over-mentored and under-sponsored. And I think that to raise a spotlight on this as a potential issue as we navigate 2021 with disproportionate people in the office and working from home is really a critical insight. So thank you so much. Any other insights for our listeners and viewers before we kind of close out today's podcast? Any other sort of one key takeaway that people should walk away and reflect on?
I would say it is around what is good leadership. I do think we look around to role models and we role model ourselves after that. And at the moment, the top leaders tend to be men and have a more male-oriented leadership style. And that was what was valued. And I believe during this pandemic and now with racial inequities, we are going to redesign what the skills, competencies are that actually work better. And we have demonstrated, as you raised earlier, empathy was very low down on the list. It was seen as, a female trait, a soft skill. And we found that that was actually a real benefit if you had that in your toolkit. And now I see people trying to learn empathy and to practice that. So I do think that's going to be something to be on the watch out. Let's not accept now what that value of the previous definition of what good leadership looks like. And it's time to change it up.
Leading with empathy. And even if you think about pharma and healthcare, empathetic engagement is critical to the caregivers, to the stakeholders, to their challenges and concerns. So I would agree that I believe that agility, collaboration, and empathy really have risen to the top of core capabilities, as we think towards the future. I want to thank you so much for joining today's podcast. You're an amazing, inspirational leader, and it's been a pleasure to have you on today's podcast. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Wendy.
I'm Dr. Wendy Heckelman. Thank you for joining today's podcast with Laurie Cooke, and I will look forward to seeing you next week. Have a great rest of your day.